Hello and welcome to the Content Bite. We're a podcast for freelancers who use their words to make money. I'm Rachel Smith, founder of the jobs board and freelance community Rachel's List. I'm also a freelancer myself, a journalist, copywriter and content producer. And my co-host is, of course, the fabulous Lynn Testoni. Hello, Lynn. It's just the two of us today after a heap of guest episodes.
Hi, Rachel. Lovely to see you again. Hi, everyone. I'm Lynn Testoni. I'm also a writer, content creator and journalist. And Rachel, I can't think of anyone else I would rather Zoom with alone.
Thank you. I want to be alone. That's very Greta Garbo, isn't it?
It is.
But you're not alone because I'm here.
Yes.
But, I know what you mean. It is weird because we've had so many episodes with just us and then we had a run of guests for ages there, didn't we?
We did. And how good was John Espirian on all the LinkedIn tips last week?
I know, so much gold. But I feel very guilty because I haven't done a thing to my LinkedIn profile since that episode. I have all the info and I just have to pull my finger out.
Yes, you definitely do. I did a few tweaks to my profile last week after his tips, and I've certainly been commentating more because that's what he said. That's what you have to do. And he'll be checking. In fact, every time though I comment, he comments on my comments. So
you've got to keep commenting.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really interesting. But today we're talking about pricing, and I think it's something every freelancer has to grapple with and negotiate and think about. And we're inspired to do this on a great thread that's been circulating on Twitter by a guy called Tom Hurst. And I also think whenever I'm looking at freelancer Facebook groups or whatever, everyone asks about pricing all the time, and figuring out how to price a project and what type of pricing structure to use. It never ends, does it?
No, it's like hustling. It's quite depressing that it never ends really when you're a freelancer. But I think that pricing and costing and all of that becomes more second nature the more years that you're freelancing. Definitely. Do you feel that?
Yes, definitely. I found it really hard at first when I started freelancing. And I think particularly most of us, I came from the media and they just told you what to charge or what they were going to pay you. But it does get easier with practice. I've been doing it for 4 years and I'm much more confident about it and I know a lot better about how I work. Yeah.
Yes. Well, coming from the media, that's kind of where the first one that we're going to talk about, isn't it? Is about pricing your work by the word, which is something that will probably be hugely familiar to many listeners on the podcast because you're all journalists, or many of you are, a great proportion of you are. And this is the main pricing structure used by editors and publishers across the board, of course. What's your top tip for using pricing by the word, Lynn, or any tips for journos out there on, who are stuck with this kind of pricing structure?
Well, I think it's always best to try and negotiate if you can. It does seem hard to ask for more, but I think everyone might be surprised at the wriggle room. I know when I was an editor, I had a few people push back on word rate, and I occasionally went higher for a piece I really wanted, or a writer I felt was particularly good, or a real subject matter expert. And maybe it's just me, but it never worried me, it never upset me if somebody asked for more. I'd say, good on you. If I could find more, I would, and if I couldn't, I never had hard feelings. And then, of course, there's this famous story, and I won't name him, but a very well-known male editor who apparently paid the men more than the women. And I always think, well, maybe the men asked for more and the women didn't. Who knows? But yeah, something to think about.
That's so shocking, but it's also not a surprise.
Yeah.
I know we've got a blog post on that. And how men pitched as well in the way that they pitched and got their pitches across and how compared to how women pitch. So I'll dig that out and put it in the show notes. Yeah, I totally agree. I think that a lot of us just accept that the word rate is locked in and that's their budget and that's it. But I think the editors will sometimes and can sometimes meet you halfway. So if I'm trying to get more or I'm not sure if I want to take a project, I'll say, look, I would normally get X per word for a piece of this complexity or this type of piece or something. Is there any room to move in the budget on your word rate? And I just see where they can go from that because that gives them a chance to go, no, sorry, that's the budget, or maybe we can do another 20 cents a word or something. But my main tip for word rate pricing, especially if you're starting out and you're not really sure what to accept, is choose a rate that you won't go below and stick to it. And for me, I try and hover around the 70, 80 cents a word mark. It used to be $1 a word back in the magazine salad days, didn't it? But
yes.
It's gone down a bit. But now if I'm doing something, especially content, sometimes that's by the word, which is quite strange. I won't go below 50 cents a word if I really like the client and the work's regular. But saying that, I'm also a terrible overwriter when I'm writing for digital. And I feel there aren't those stringent parameters that you get when you're writing for print. You know, it has to fit into a layout. So my digital clients get a shit hot deal if they say it's 50 cents a word for 800 words, and I give them 1,000 words.
Oh,
So
no.
yeah, I'm an idiot. But anyway.
Well, sometimes with 50 cents a word, I'll say yes to that if it's pretty straightforward. Like if it's something, as you talk about regular clients, if I've written about it before, I can write quite fast on that. You know, if it's a subject I'm pretty keen about, and if it doesn't involve an interview as well, that's the other thing, because that adds to it. But the next pricing structure, so if we talk, word rate is usually more editorial, but when you work in content, it's often more, or advertising, copywriting, it's often more about either hourly or daily rates. What do you think?
Look, I think there's a lot of hoo-ha about not pricing yourself hourly. And we just did a masterclass where Rebecca Lambert from the Freelance Jungle mentioned getting away from hourly rates and trying to price yourself more on a day rate basis. And I guess the logic here is, you know, hourly rates can be messy. You're always having to track your hours, and you may find yourself caught in estimating what something will take you, and it takes you longer. Yeah.
I found agencies often insist on hourly rate, and sometimes it's because they're on charging clients and they want some visibility. So they'll say their copywriter spent 8 hours on this or whatever. And a few of those jobs I've had to do timesheets, and I find it's really clunky and annoying and time consuming, ironically. So you spend all this time justifying your time. And when I work in-house as a sub-editor, that's the usual process. I do a timesheet. I don't like it, but you know, sometimes it is what it is, because I also think it penalizes you a bit when you're more efficient, because I know that I'm quite fast as both a writer and a sub-editor, perhaps because I've been doing it for so long. And I think this sort of pricing works against me. So, you know, I might be able to do something in 2 hours that somebody with less experience can do in 4. So it sort of penalizes me. So if you do use hourly pricing, make sure you charge a higher amount than if you would have earned in a 9-to-5 job. So like in-house, you might have been getting $40 or $50 an hour. So I'd be doing an hourly rate of 60 to 80, depending on the complexity of the work. So just, and it also, you have to cover things like super and tax, which super. So if you're working for $50 an hour for a big publisher, you're actually getting $55 an hour because it's super. So you've got to add all those things on. So I think that's important.
Yeah, it's definitely, you've got to be mindful of all of that when you're freelancing. And I think so often we forget about that stuff. But I don't know. I think there are some cases where hourly pricing can work. Like if it's a small copywriting job that's going to be 2 or 3 hours, it's really tricky to say, well, this is going to be a day rate, or I suppose you could do a half day rate. But also if a client comes to you and says, I have these 5 little bitsy tasks, or I have these little bitsy tasks every month, and it's different from a big project that you're doing, sometimes in that case you can say, well, we can have an hours bank arrangement where you pay for 10 hours of my time, and you have to track then what those little bitsy tasks, how long they take you. And then when you reach the end of the hours bank, they buy more hours. And sometimes that can work if you're doing little small tasks for a client.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
It's not for everybody. A lot of people hate those little bitsy tasks, don't they? So
yeah, it's good when you've got a regular client that you know well.
Yeah.
And it does sort of fit in with other big jobs. If that's like, I like little jobs that fit in with the big jobs as well. So day rate pricing is the other thing you come across as a freelancer, particularly if you work with agencies. Again, they often want a day rate. And I think some of that stuff it's good to have those things in your head already and noted, because sometimes they'll ask you on the phone or straight away. It's good to have that already worked out. I was told that it's best to calculate this on a 6-hour day, not an 8-hour day. So because that takes into account things like breaks, admin, all that sort of stuff. And it's not like you can fit in other stuff. If you've got 6 hours work, you can't fit in other stuff. And it can also work if a client buys your time by the day. You can say, Tuesday, I'm all yours, devote your entire day to that client's work. Do you do day rates?
Yeah, I do day rates sometimes. That's funny what you say about the 6-hourly thing. I should do that. I was charging by an 8-hour day, but probably you do longer in the work and then take the hour off for lunch or something like that. But a 6-hour day is probably better. And I think it's a great way to price yourself if you can get it. And if it's not tied as well to specific deliverables, how do you do that? Like if the client says to you, well, you know, yes, I'll book your day rate, but in that day rate, I want you to produce 4 blog posts and 25 social media, pieces. So it's like, how do you quantify what you can actually do in a day if the client is going to be really picky about that?
I know. It goes back to the same problem with hourly rates when you get lots of deliverables, and because you go in and they say, I want 4 blog posts, and then you find out that that
They all need
includes the interviews and they come in and then they say, oh yeah, finance hasn't got us that stuff about the blah, or marketing hasn't given us the images, or you've got, it gets harder.
So you need to have some idea in your head of what you can actually feasibly do in a day within your day rate, so that you can be realistic about that with the client. But anyway, if you don't have a day rate and you're trying to figure out what your day rate should be, we've got a pay rates report that's free to download in the toolkit at Rachel's List. So that can give you some guidelines. You can work out your day rate from that, and we'll put a link to the show notes in it. What's next on our pricing structure list?
Well, in the Facebook groups I'm in, I keep hearing about value-based pricing. And this is an interesting one. This is when you estimate what value your work brings to the client. So you might sort of estimate that your efforts on writing new copy and optimizing SEO on the client's website might lead to, say, $50,000 worth of extra leads in business in the next 3 months. And you charge a percentage of that value. I don't know.
Yeah, I totally get why this pricing is popular among many established freelancers, but it's not something that I really do. Do you do value-based pricing?
No, I haven't. I think it's something to keep in mind when you're working on products with high profit margins. If your work delivers like 10,000 in sales because the unit prices are high, like because I work in interiors, like if I do something that's a blog post that sells a $10,000 piece of furniture, that's obviously better than a $20 cushion. So it's not unreasonable, but the risks are higher, especially if a campaign doesn't do well. And for sometimes things that are out of your control, like there's a global pandemic.
And people won't buy that $20,000 couch.
Yeah, exactly. I'd only do it if it was an area of specialty for me, then I really knew the market well. I mean, I think that's tricky. I think that's the hardest thing. But if you're a real specialist, I've heard it works really well with finance too, because there's a lot of high margins in financial thing. And that's one of the reasons they pay a lot more too.
Oh, that's interesting. I wonder what the percentage is. Like if you're doing value-based pricing, do we know what the percentage would be, or would it change every time? What percentage you would charge the client as a value?
I reckon it'd be between the 5 and 10%. And I'm going on that. Maybe this is my background. That's what an architect would do. They charge between, usually 7 to 10% of the value of the project. Obviously, if you're working on $1 million project, it's bigger risks and everything than if you're working on a $20,000 project. So I that's what a lot of professionals charge, people like architects, interior design. That's in my sphere. So I would be looking at that. I mean, people have done it for big property developments. I've done some big property developments, and certainly, yes, if they sell a $2 million unit because of my copy, there is more money to be had there. And the percentage of that is not unreasonable, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So the next type of pricing we're going to talk about is project-based fees. Obviously, this is something that a lot of freelancers will be familiar with, and that's where you cost out the project carefully according to the brief, and you charge a flat fee for the project. So you might cost out the research, the interviews, the writing time, the project management if you're doing that. Any edits you would include, SEO, you might include meeting times if you're going to have to go and meet the client, or even spend an hour a week on Zoom with them. You would definitely cost all that in. And then you work out a flat fee, add a buffer. I would definitely add a buffer, or add 20% for any contingencies. And you itemize all that in a contract to the client. And then they give you the sign off and away you go. So I use this kind of pricing a lot, especially for big copywriting jobs where the parameters are pretty clear. But I think that where you can run into trouble and where a lot of freelancers sort of hit the wall is when there's unexpected scope creep on the project.
Yeah.
And that's where the client decides to add something to the original scope, or they come up and say, hey, can we write another couple of landing pages into the website? Or maybe you could add a couple of EDMs in a month or whatever. And you have to become really good at nipping that in the bud and saying, yep, no problem, but that's going to come under a new quote or a new job number or something like that, and send them that for sign off. So you can continue it, but it doesn't come under the original project.
Yes, on the contract I send my clients, it gives a project base and say exactly the deliverables I'm doing, how many blog posts, SEO, whatever it is. And then I say anything else, this is based on what's in this contract, anything outside, and I price myself out at $80 an hour. And so anything beyond the scope of this will be that, and it will be costed separately and sent to you for approval. And that's project-based pricing is what I use all the time. And I think it gets easier and easier the longer you've been doing it, because you develop a better idea of how long a project will take you. To me, that's the problem. Like when I started, I think, oh yeah, I could write a blog post in a day, which I can. But then you find with certain clients, yes, but then they want 2 rounds of corrections because they suddenly remembered they want to do, and things that you could feasibly last a day actually lasts a couple of days, and then you've basically underpriced yourself. You take a cut. So I generally take a look at the job and estimate how long it will take, as you say, like working at the parameters of it. And I have an internal cost of about $80 an hour, which is, I guess, what I worked out right at the beginning. This is what I need to make, and I go from there. So if I feel something would take me about 6 hours, I charge $480, and then I go from there.
Yeah. I think it's really important, because I think you can cost all that out and then give the client a flat fee, but it's so important to actually itemize all of those deliverables on a contract. And we've got a number of contracts at Rachel's List, which are really easy to modify, and you can just add the deliverables in and change some of the copy and send it off. We're going to give you a code at the end of the episode so you can get a little discount on our contracts. I would have some kind of contract just to formalize the deliverables, because I think it is so much easier to have something you can go back to, if something comes up. Yeah. Okay,
and
so
I recently had a client who felt it was too expensive, and because I'd itemized everything, she said, okay, we've decided we don't need this and this, which was great. They may actually come back, which often happens. They come back and say, actually, we would like this, but they know it's beyond the scope and they'll charge separately. So that works out quite well.
Yep.
The last type of pricing that we've done is retainer-based pricing. Now, this is the holy grail sometimes. Well, a lot of freelancers feel it is. We did talk about it in detail in an earlier episode, and it's definitely a good way to go and a good way to work when it suits you and the client. Having guaranteed work every month is comforting, and I had one for years. And you do get to know a client, what they want and how they work. I found that I get quite efficient when I've got a long-term client, because I know the business well. Like, you often know the basics, and I don't have any at the moment because that's what COVID-19 will do to you. But what about you, Rach? Do you have any retainers?
I have one at the moment with a marketing company, which works well. I do social and copywriting for them, but I'm always trying to lock them in with good clients who want the same bulk of work every month, because I think, like you said, it's so nice to know that a portion of your expenses are sorted every month.
Yes.
And then you can plug the gaps around that. And if the work is easy and the client's nice to work for, it can just be great peace of mind having a couple of retainers in place. And we actually have a really good blog post on this one as well that was written by Steve Colquhoun, one of the members at Rachel's List. So we'll put that into the show notes too. It's a complete guide to retainers and setting one up with a client. So I would really recommend, you read that if you're in that space and trying to negotiate retainers with clients.
Pricing is a minefield.
It is.
But it does get easier with practice. This is something that threw me a lot when I started, but I'm much better. And I think part of it is working out what works for you and the way you work and the sort of projects and jobs you're doing. And the more you do it, the better you get.
Yeah, it's definitely about looking at the type of project or job and figuring out what type of pricing structure fits for that job. And you definitely do get better at that with time. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of the episode. Thank you, everybody, for listening and for the lovely reviews. We've got some really great reviews recently on Podbean and Stitcher. So we're really glad to hear that so many people out there are enjoying the show. And as a little thank you, we're doing a special deal for podcast listeners on our contracts at Rachel's List. We have a number of contracts in the toolkit, and they can help you when you're sort of nailing down the price and parameters of a job. And so if you want to use the code BYTE, BYTE 20, or one word, you can grab 20% off any contract until the end of July. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Rach. See you next week.
Okay, bye.